Five amazing flying cars that really existed. Number 5. Curtiss Autoplane. The Curtiss Autoplane is pretty much the first glimpse the world got of a flying car, outside the pages of fiction. In 1917, an aviation engineer named Glenn Curtiss dissected one of his own airplane designs and slapped some of the pieces onto an aluminum Model T. The airplane it was based on was called the Curtiss Model L Trainer, a triplane, 3 rows of wings, with a 100-horsepower engine, which is about as powerful as a decent tractor. Like a car, the front 2 tires could be turned with a steering wheel inside the cabin, and it was propelled on the ground and in the air by a propeller attached to the back. Unfortunately, the limousine of the air never really flew. By all accounts, the most it could manage was a series of short hops before it was discontinued at the start of WWI. Number 4. Dixons Flying Auto. The Flying Auto was powered by a small 40-horsepower engine, and foot pedals controlled the tail vane on the back, allowing Mr. Dixon to turn in midair. It was also supposed to be able to reach speeds of up to 100 miles per hour, 160 kph, and was able to fly forwards, backwards, sideways, and hover. Not bad for a flying car that was never heard from again. Number 3. Convair Car. The Convair Model 116 flying car took flight for the first time in 1946, and looked like nothing more than a small airplane welded onto a car. And essentially, that's exactly what it was. The wings, tail, and propeller could be detached from the plastic car, allowing it to be driven like a regular vehicle on the road. When it needed to go where no roads could take it, the plane attachment was fitted on. The 116 model only had one prototype, which itself managed a whopping 66 flights. A few years later, designer Ted Hall recreated the machine as the Convair Model 118, bumping the engine from a 130-horsepower model to a 190-horsepower beast that gave it more power in the air. Convair planned to build 160,000 for their first production run, but that never panned out, thanks to a tragedy which saw one of the prototypes crash in California. When the pilot took the car into the air, he had assumed that the fuel tank was full. But the Convair car had 2 fuel gauges, one for the car's engine and one for the plane's, and while the car still had plenty of gas, the plane engine ran dry in midair. Such are the dangers of multitasking. Number 2. Curtiss Wright VZ7. The Curtiss Wright VZ7 resulted from one of the first attempts by the U.S. military to get involved in the flying car industry. Ideally, the VZ7 was meant to be a type of flying jeep. Like a jeep, it allowed a pilot to maneuver through rough terrain on the ground, but with the not insignificant bonus that it could also fly. It was developed by Curtiss Wright, which, interestingly, formed through the merger of the Wright Company, the Wright brothers, and Curtiss Airplane, Glenn Curtiss. Curtiss and the Wright brothers had been fierce rivals during the early days of aviation. Number 1. Piasecki Air Jeep. With the VZ7 grounded forever, the Army turned to a very different prototype, the Piasecki VZ8 Air Jeep. Bear in mind that helicopters had already become popular by this point, but it turned out that the military was interested in something smaller than helicopters, which could be successfully flown with less training. The Air Jeep went through 7 different versions before it was finally deemed unfit for military use, but they all kept the basic design, 2 large vertical propellers in the front and the back of the craft, with a seat in the middle for the pilot and either 3 or 4 wheels for ground use. While the first model was flat, later ones curved upwards at the front and back to form a flattened V shape. The Navy even tried to fit one model with floats, with the hope of using it at sea, but that idea was eventually abandoned, along with the rest of the program.